History does not begin with collapse. Before revolutions, before executions, before empires fall, there is always a long period where everything still appears functional. Institutions continue. Titles are respected. Orders are followed. The system looks stable because people behave as if it is. But stability is often only the absence of resistance. 18th century France lived inside that illusion. The monarchy ruled. The aristocracy governed. The hierarchy of power appeared fixed and unquestionable. For most people, the world seemed arranged forever. Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand was born into this environment, but he did not experience it as secure. Physically unfit for military life, excluded from traditional paths of honor and command, he was forced to observe power rather than perform it. That exclusion shaped him. While others pursued visibility, Talleyrand learned to value access. While others sought loyalty, he studied dependency. While others believed in permanence, he watched for imbalance. He learned how decisions were actually made, not through speeches, not through public declarations, but through hesitation, through silence, through what was postponed rather than announced. He saw that authority was maintained less by strength than by collective agreement, and that agreement could weaken long before violence appeared. France was not yet collapsing, but it was already misaligned. Its institutions moved slower than its problems. Its elites defended tradition without adapting it. Its authority relied on habit rather than legitimacy. Talleyrand noticed this not as a moral failure, but as a structural condition. He did not position himself to defend the system. He positioned himself to understand its limits. From within administrative offices and diplomatic circles, he observed how power reacted under pressure, how leaders delayed decisions, how compromises replaced conviction, how stability depended increasingly on denial. This awareness did not make him revolutionary. It made him cautious. He understood that when systems finally break, they do not reward loyalty. They reward timing. Talleyrand did not prepare to lead change. He prepared to survive it. That preparation required distance. It required restraint. And it required the discipline to remain uncommitted while others rushed toward certainty. This was not passivity. It was calculation. Long before France descended into chaos, Talleyrand had already adjusted himself to a future where continuity would matter more than belief. That adjustment, made quietly and without spectacle, would define every decision that followed. When the French Revolution began, it did not announce itself as destruction. It announced itself as correction. Its language was moral. Its promises were rational. Its supporters believed they were restoring balance, not ending a world. Most men responded to the revolution with belief. They chose principles. They declared loyalties. They attached their identities to ideas that felt permanent in the moment. Talleyrand did not. He did not defend the monarchy publicly. He did not glorify the revolution. He observed both with the same distance. This was not indecision, it was discipline. Talleyrand understood that revolutions accelerate time. They compress years into weeks. And in accelerated systems, belief becomes dangerous. Men who believed too early were exposed. Men who believed too loudly were remembered. Men who believed absolutely were eventually eliminated. The revolution demanded certainty because certainty simplified chaos. But simplicity does not survive prolonged instability. Talleyrand recognized that revolutionary power was unstable by nature. It relied on momentum rather than structure, on emotion rather than administration. on purity rather than durability. He chose not to anchor himself to any single faction. While others made speeches, he managed transitions. While others denounced enemies, he maintained channels. While others committed publicly, he remained useful privately. This position was not admired, it was tolerated. And tolerance during revolutions is more valuable than admiration. Talleyrand understood that political violence rarely targets enemies first. It targets liabilities, those who cannot adapt, those who are too visible, those whose loyalty is already known. By remaining ideologically indistinct, he avoided becoming a symbol. Symbols are consumed quickly in revolutionary systems. As the revolution radicalized, as alliances shifted, as executions normalized, Talleyrand adjusted his proximity to power without ever attaching himself to it. He did not resist the revolution. He did not celebrate it. He navigated it. This navigation required restraint. It required silence when others spoke, and it required the ability to accept suspicion without responding to it. Talleyrand survived not because he was trusted, but because he was necessary. And necessity in unstable systems offers protection that belief never can. The revolution reshaped France violently, but it did not reshape Talleyrand. He had already accepted that instability was not an event but a condition, and once instability becomes the condition, the primary objective is not victory, it is endurance. When Napoleon Bonaparte emerged from the chaos of the revolution, he did not present himself as continuity. He presented himself as necessity. France was exhausted. Its institutions were weakened. Its population desired order more than principle. Napoleon understood this, and he offered stability through authority. Power, in this phase, demands loyalty. Not competence, not restraint, but devotion. Talleyrand entered Napoleon's government with full awareness of this demand, and he chose to meet it only partially. He served Napoleon, he advised him, he represented him diplomatically, but he never surrendered his independence. This distinction mattered. Talleyrand understood that authoritarian systems collapse not because they lack intelligence, but because they confuse obedience with durability. Napoleon expanded rapidly. Territory increased. Influence spread. Victories accumulated, but expansion is not consolidation. Behind military success, administrative strain increased. Allies became dependencies. Dependencies became liabilities. Talleyrand observed this quietly. While others celebrated conquest, he measured sustainability. While others mistook dominance for permanence, he calculated limits. He did not oppose Napoleon openly. Opposition would have been eliminated. He did not flatter him excessively. Flattery creates expectation. Instead, Talleyrand practiced controlled proximity, close enough to understand decision-making, distant enough to remain unowned by it. This position required discipline. It required the ability to appear loyal without becoming expendable, and it required patience. As Napoleon centralized power, voices around him grew louder and more absolute. Certainty replaced deliberation. Speed replaced caution. Talleyrand recognized this pattern. Empires rarely collapse at the moment of defeat. They begin to collapse when leaders stop listening. Napoleon still listened, but selectively, and selection narrowed over time. Talleyrand adjusted accordingly. He reduced confrontation, he increased ambiguity, and he began preparing for a future in which Napoleon's authority would no longer protect those closest to him. This preparation was not betrayal, it was recognition. Power that demands total loyalty cannot survive honest advice. and advisors who understand this must choose between influence and survival. Talleyrand chose survival, not as escape, but as position. He remained inside the system while refusing to be absorbed by it. That refusal would soon define his greatest advantage. There is a phase in every authoritarian system when power still appears absolute but has already begun to decay internally. The armies remain loyal, the institutions still function, orders are obeyed, yet the structure no longer corrects itself. Napoleon reached this phase gradually, not through defeat but through accumulation. Each victory reduced his tolerance for dissent. Each success confirmed his instincts. Each expansion narrowed the circle of voices he trusted. Talleyrand recognized this pattern early. He had seen it before, not in Napoleon, but in systems that mistake momentum for stability. As the empire grew, decisions accelerated. Deliberation became inefficient. Caution became suspicious. Napoleon still demanded advice, but only advice that confirmed his direction. At this point, counsel becomes performance. Talleyrand understood that influence was no longer gained by persuasion, but by timing. He reduced his presence, he limited his visibility, he chose absence over confrontation. This was not retreat, it was recalibration. Power, when it senses decline, punishes resistance, but it also punishes proximity. Those closest to failing authority absorb its collapse first. Talleyrand began to separate himself structurally, not publicly. He maintained access without attachment. He preserved relevance without identification. And he positioned himself as an intermediary, not an extension. This required restraint. It required tolerating suspicion. And it required accepting that silence would be interpreted as disloyalty. Talleyrand accepted that cost. He understood that when empires fall, they do not fall symmetrically. Some are crushed, some are erased, and some simply step aside at the correct moment. As Napoleon's decisions became increasingly unilateral, as alliances strained, as resources thinned beneath continued expansion, Talleyrand stopped attempting to correct outcomes. Correction was no longer possible. The system had passed that point. At this stage, the only meaningful decision left is positioning. Talleyrand positioned himself not for victory but for continuity. He did not announce this shift. He did not justify it. He allowed events to validate it. History rarely marks the moment when alignment changes. It only records consequences. By the time Napoleon's authority visibly weakened, Talleyrand had already adjusted to a different future. He was no longer preparing for collapse. He was already operating beyond it. When Napoleon finally began to fall, the collapse did not arrive as a single moment. It arrived in fragments. Allies hesitated. Resources stretched thin. Confidence hardened into stubbornness. Decisions repeated themselves instead of adapting. To the public, the empire still appeared intact. The symbols remained. The authority was still asserted. But internally, the system had already lost elasticity. Talleyrand did not wait for defeat to confirm what he already knew. He understood that collapse is not defined by loss of power, but by loss of correction. When leaders can no longer absorb feedback, the outcome is decided, even if the timeline is not. At this stage, loyalty becomes dangerous, not because it is immoral, but because it binds survival to an outcome that no longer adjusts. Talleyrand reduced his exposure carefully. He did not denounce Napoleon. He did not oppose him publicly. He allowed distance to grow naturally, as if by coincidence. This required patience. Those who leave too early are destroyed. Those who leave too late are buried. Timing at this point is everything. As foreign powers reorganized, as coalitions formed and reformed, Talleyrand positioned himself as a point of continuity, not as a defender of the empire, but as a stabilizing presence beyond it. This distinction mattered. When regimes fall, they do not seek loyalists. They seek administrators, intermediaries, men who can translate one system into another. Talleyrand made himself readable to the future. He preserved relationships. He maintained correspondence. He avoided irreversible commitments. While others clung to symbols, he focused on functions. He understood that governments change faster than institutions and that institutions outlast ideologies. When Napoleon was removed, the question was not who had believed in him, but who could operate without him. Talleyrand was already operating. Kings returned. New authorities demanded legitimacy, and legitimacy required continuity more than passion. Talleyrand offered continuity, not because he believed in restoration, but because restoration needed men who had not been consumed by collapse. Survival at this scale does not look heroic. It looks ambiguous, it looks compromised, and it invites moral judgment. But history does not reward moral clarity during transitions. It rewards functionality. Talleyrand was functional. He did not celebrate the fall. He did not mourn it. He adapted to it. And adaptation, when practiced without illusion, becomes power. By the time Europe reorganized itself, Talleyrand was not rebuilding his position. He had never lost it. Surviving political collapse does not come without cost. Figures like Talleyrand are often described as adaptable, but adaptability without spectacle is rarely admired. It does not look heroic. It does not inspire loyalty, and it invites suspicion rather than respect. Talleyrand lived under that suspicion for most of his life. He was never fully trusted, not by revolutionaries who doubted his commitment, not by emperors who doubted his devotion, and not by restored monarchs who doubted his loyalty. Each regime understood his usefulness, but none considered him one of their own. This is the consequence of surviving too much history. Endurance at this level creates distance. Distance creates misunderstanding, and misunderstanding becomes reputation. Talleyrand accepted that reputation early. He understood that surviving transitions meant forfeiting admiration. He chose to remain operational rather than celebrated, and that choice, repeated across decades of instability, would define both his influence and his isolation. Talleyrand understood something that many of his contemporaries did not. Stability is not created by belief. It is created by continuity. Continuity requires individuals who can function even when systems lose legitimacy. People who can operate without emotional attachment to symbols, leaders, or outcomes. This made Talleyrand indispensable, and it also made him isolated. He participated in negotiations that reshaped Europe. He influenced borders, treaties, and transitions, but he remained detached from the narratives used to justify those decisions. He did not speak in the language of ideals. He spoke in the language of administration. History prefers men who act decisively and attach themselves to a single cause. It distrusts figures who remain useful after causes disappear. Talleyrand accepted this position deliberately. He understood that maintaining order during transitions would never earn admiration, only suspicion. And yet, without figures like him, transitions collapse into chaos. Talleyrand chose to absorb that suspicion in exchange for remaining operational. That trade, made repeatedly and without public defense, defined his role in history. Talleyrand lived long enough to see the world he had navigated become unfamiliar even to him. The political structures he once managed evolved. The language of power shifted. New forms of authority replaced the old ones he understood so well. Slowly, the skills that had allowed him to survive instability stopped being necessary. This is the final cost of quiet survival. Those who shape history loudly are remembered as symbols. Those who shape it silently are replaced once their function has been fulfilled. Talleyrand understood this without bitterness. He did not seek recognition. He did not attempt to preserve relevance. He accepted that his role had always been transitional, designed for moments of uncertainty rather than permanence. He had never belonged to a stable world. He had belonged to moments of change. And when stability finally returned, there was no place left for the kind of man who had learned to operate inside collapse. Talleyrand did not resist this outcome. He had always known that endurance does not guarantee remembrance. Talleyrand did not leave monuments. He did not leave a heroic legacy. He left transitions. Transitions are not dramatic. They are slow, procedural, and often invisible. They exist to prevent collapse, not to inspire admiration. History prefers clarity. It prefers heroes who build and villains who destroy. It prefers moments that can be named and remembered. Men like Talleyrand exist between those moments. He did not control history. He did not command its direction. He understood its momentum and adjusted himself to it with discipline and restraint. That discipline allowed him to outlast kings, emperors, and revolutions. But endurance has a cost. When stability finally returns, it no longer requires those who learn to operate inside instability. Their skills become unnecessary. Their presence becomes irrelevant. So history moves on without ceremony. It does not erase them. It simply stops noticing them. And that quiet disappearance is often the final consequence of making decisions that prevent collapse rather than create glory.